Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Hey, for those of you who've been geeking out on this channel for a while now, you know that I routinely talk about why everyone should pay attention to what we do here in Washington State related to gun laws, because for those of you who live in jurisdictions where perhaps you get to live a little bit more freer, like Americans should, it gives you a sneak peek at what may be coming to a jurisdiction near you someday. Out here on the West Coast, in addition to Washington, of course, we have the king of all crazy states, California. But our brothers and sisters to the south, Oregon, also have a tendency to get a little goofy about things. And they have a piece of legislation being proposed right now that I think everybody around the country needs to pay very careful attention to. So today, we're going to spend a few minutes and talk about Oregon, a state looking for new and innovative ways to disarm their citizens. Okay, before we get rolling down the road we are going down, proud to announce that this video is being brought to you by Security Gun Club in Woodinville. That's right, this is Washington's nicest indoor facility. You will not find a finer indoor shooting facility anywhere in the state of Washington. Now, the only thing better than the facility itself, well, that's two things. Number one, they have absolutely the best staff, the friendliest, most professional staff you'll ever meet. Stop by, say hi to them, tell them I sent you. The second thing, and perhaps what I am most proud of with my relationship with Security Gun Club, is their dedication to education. You see, Jackson, the head of training over there, former law enforcement officer himself, listen, he's built a curriculum that will cater to anybody of any needs at any skill level, whether you're brand new to firearms, whether you've been around firearms all your life and you want some really high-end advanced personal training. Security Gun Club can do all of it for you. Hey, listen, you need to bone up on the law to make sure that you not only stay out of the morgue, but you stay out of prison. We'll sign up for their basic self-defense law class 101 each month, taught by yours truly. Hey, listen, if you want more information about it, visit them at securitygunclub.com. Now, that is not a misprint. That is security with an E at the end, so that's securitygunclub.com. Okay, so the piece of legislation that we're talking about today is Ballot Measure 114. And as I've mentioned before, the reason that I think that for those of you who are kind enough to geek out with us from various areas of the country, why you should pay attention to what we do out here on the left coast is I do think it gives you kind of an advanced sneak peek at what types of gun control legislation may be coming your way at a day sometime later. Now, Washington does a lot of goofy things. Granted, we all try to catch up to the king of all crazies, the state of California. But our brothers and sisters to the south in Oregon, they also struggle with these insanity issues themselves. Come to mention that, we have Ballot Measure 114, and this is a real doozy. Now, I have done a video before on what I believe is the worst piece of legislation ever drafted, and I wouldn't say that this is the worst piece of legislation ever drafted, but it's up there. It's high on the list. And to the folks in Oregon, if this becomes law, to you lawful and responsible gun owners in Oregon, your rights are absolutely being trampled by this ballot measure. Now, there are a lot of things that this ballot measure would do if enacted into law. I'm not going to get into all of the details lest we end up having a 30-minute video here, but there's a couple of things I do want to point out. The first thing, and we'll touch on this because we here in Washington are quite familiar with this, is yes, it comes with a magazine restriction of 10 rounds. Now, unlike Washington State, which limited the commercial sale of high-capacity magazines. And again, I'm using the term high-capacity magazine because that's the term used in the statute. Candidly, a magazine that holds 12 rounds or a magazine that holds 15 rounds is not a high-capacity magazine for most firearms. That's the standard capacity magazine. So for those of you immediately getting into the comment box and freaking out about my choice of words, remember, I use the terminology in the legislation, okay? Now, Washington State restricted the commercial sale. You cannot sell a magazine with more than 10 rounds. You cannot purchase one, okay? You cannot distribute one. You cannot manufacture one. And Oregon's legislation does all of that, but there is an added word to that that all of you need to be aware of, because the section of this ballot measure, if enacted into law, reads as follows. Notwithstanding ORS 166-250 to 166-470, and except as expressly provided in subsections 3 to 5 of this section. A person commits the crime of unlawful manufacture, importation, possession, use, purchase, sale, or otherwise transferring of large capacity magazines if the person manufactures, imports, possesses, uses, purchases, sells, or otherwise transfers any large capacity magazine in Oregon on or after the effective date of this 2022 act. So yes, unlike Washington State, where there is nothing unlawful about possessing a large capacity magazine, there is certainly nothing unlawful about possessing one, carrying one. The state of Oregon's ballot measure purports to do differently. Now, there is a couple of exceptions in that, sections 3 through 5. Now, there is a grandfathering provision found in Section 5, which if you did own the firearm or the magazine prior to the enactment of the bill, and you're able to prove such, you would be allowed to possess those magazines. Now, that's found in subsection 5 of that bill. Now, let's move on to what the more concerning part of this measure is. And this is really concerning because under this legislation, if enacted, a resident in the state of Oregon is going to need to get a permit so that they have the permission of law enforcement in the state of Oregon to go buy a gun. Let me say that again. You have to go get a license or a permit before you can go purchase a gun. You have to get government's preordained blessings before you make a purchase of a gun. Now, you think that's bad. There's much more to this because in order to get that permit, you're going to have to attend the class. And everyone goes, okay, so what's the big deal? It's just the class. Well, au contraire, because the class is a live fire class. It is a class in which a person must demonstrate their proficiency with a firearm. Now, we're going to get into all of the problems that come with this in just a moment, but I'm sure many of you are beginning to connect the dots here as to how this is likely to work out. Now, am I opposed to training? No, I think every firearm owner should do tons and tons of training. And if you're new to firearms, you absolutely should be doing training, a lot of live fire training. Do I think it is essential to be a lawful and responsible gun owner? Yes, I do. Do I think it needs to be mandatory before a person exercises their God-given right? No, I don't. That's not how it works. And when you see the problems with this proposed ballot measure, you're going to see exactly why I have this opinion. Okay, so like I mentioned, the class itself is not just some basic firearm safety class that you can sit into a classroom and do this. No, this is actually a class that requires a live fire, and the class needs to be approved by local law enforcement, which means not only does the teacher need to be approved by local law enforcement and the curriculum need to be approved by local law enforcement, so does the actual facility. And you could understand how few facilities in the state of Oregon are going to be willing or even capable of permitting a class like this to be conducted at their facility. And without the ability to do this training, a person cannot qualify to get the permit necessary to go to a gun store or to go online and purchase a firearm. And of course, let us not remember that Oregon is suffering from the same problems that the state of Washington is, which is underfunding and understaffing of police, oftentimes intentional by local government. The police can't even respond to all of the crimes. The response times are down throughout the entire northwest region of the United States, and yet now we are asking them to employ a whole new training curriculum for the public that they need to complete before they can go then exercise a constitutional right. There is at least one estimate, because as usual, why this piece of legislation has all sorts of solutions still looking for a problem. What it doesn't come with is a way to fund this. So there is an estimate that this is going to cost law enforcement in the state of Oregon annually somewhere between $40 and $55 million per year. Yes, this legislation does have a cap for the cost of the permit itself, but there is no cap in the cost of training. So even if the permit to actually go purchase a firearm costs only $65, what's to say that the training program doesn't cost a person $2,500? And I want you to think what this does for a first-time gun buyer. Let's say perhaps a mother of a couple of young children who's recently divorced. The husband's been acting in a rather erratic fashion, has a terrible drinking problem, has been making all sorts of violent threats against her and the family. She even has a protection order in place, but that's just a piece of paper. She needs to go arm herself so that she can protect herself and her family. But you see, now the problem is that she needs to first get a permit in order to get a gun, okay? But then in order to get the permit, she has to do a live fire training drills and instruction. But of course, she can't get a gun because she doesn't have the permit yet. And you see the circular trap that they set everybody in. And this woman now is stuck between a rock and a hard place where she has no legal access to a firearm necessary to protect herself and family. And then let's remember that after you've gone through this background check to get the permit and all the training and a search of all of your medical records and all of those things, including your mental health records, then you still have to go buy a firearm and fill out a Form 4473, which means you're going to go through a background check and all of the other things and a search of your medical records. And so it actually is creating two separate times in which the state of Oregon or the federal government can deny or deprive a person the ability to arm themselves. Now, there's another provision in this bill that the folks in Oregon need to be really, really aware of, which is right now under Oregon law, if you are awaiting a transfer of a firearm and it takes longer than 3 days for the background check to complete, the FFL has the right, the ability to transfer the firearm. Washington State actually has similar provisions like that for handguns and semi-automatic rifles. However, this ballot measure, if enacted into law, removes that 3-day period, which means that with the massive backlog that you inevitably are going to have in the system when this bill becomes law, a person who is applying for a firearm, who's otherwise lawfully allowed to possess it, they're completely legally allowed to possess a firearm, they're going to get caught in that backlog and not be granted the permission by the government to be able to go arm themselves. Now, this again demonstrates how those in the gun-grabbing community, the same political community who screamed for years and years about the rule of law, do not follow the rule of law. Let us not forget that the state of New York also had these crazy licensing requirements where you would actually need to get the state's blessings before you would have permission to go buy a firearm. Now, we know in New York Pistol and Rifle Association v. Bruen, the Supreme Court struck those rules down and gave us a framework to analyze further gun legislation that makes future legislation, such as this and Ballot Measure 114, virtually impossible to stand constitutional muster. Anybody, any first-year law student could read what's going on, could read the opinions, could read this legislation and tell you that this is not going to pass constitutional muster. The rule of law mandates that we follow Supreme Court authority. Listen, we're going to put more information about Ballot Measure 114 down below in the description box. We'll put a link to the whole entire proposed bill. And again, I will put a link down there for those of you who want to oppose this legislation, how to help those that are fighting the fight in the state of Oregon. In the meantime, you may have more questions about this or anything else related to your Second Amendment rights. And if you do, remember you can always contact us at WashingtonGunLaw.com, or you can call us directly at 425-765-0487. Now, let's remember, part of being a lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here at Washington Gun Law, is to know what the law is in every situation and how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching, and stay safe.